of India, texts that shaped our nation. We have 6 panelists for this discussion, but before I go there, I would like to briefly introduce the topic of this discussion. When the program sheet came out, a lot of us underlined this session as our go-to session because this was what we were looking forward to the most. So I hope everybody who's gathered outside the hall quickly takes their seat. We will start in the next 2 minutes. The idea behind this session, which is titled The Many Ideas of India, Texts That Shaped Our Nation, was to make a list, which was by no means exhaustive, 9 texts which shaped the idea of India. Texts that were written between 1900 and 1947, which made us as a nation what we are. This list was curated by Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. I will quickly read out the books that we think, or Dr. Chopra thinks, are essential reading to any scholar or student of Indian history. The first is a 1909 text, Hind Swaraj by Mahatma Gandhi. The second is the 1909 Uttarapara address by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. The third text is the 1909 First War of Independence book by Veer Savarkar. The next is the 1917 address to the Congress by Annie Besant. The next is the 1932 Waiting for a Visa short book by Dr. Ambedkar. Again in 1932, the book by Bhagat Singh, which is titled Why I Am an Atheist. Next is the 1936 seminal text by Dr. Ambedkar titled Annihilation of Caste. Then is the 1939 text by Veer Savarkar or Hindustan. And lastly, the 1940 text by Jinnah, on which basically conceptualized Pakistan in public discourse. So, not wasting any more time, we'll move quickly to the panelists here. I hope everybody has taken seat. We will start the session shortly. First up is Mr. Pradeep Singh. He is an eminent historian and the author of Suswa Saga, a family narrative of Eastern Dehradun, which was published in 2011. He also wrote Sals of the Valley, a memorial to Dehradun in 2017, and he's perhaps the most important chronicler of the city of Dehradun today. We would invite you to come on stage, sir. Thank you, sir. Next is Mr. Kulbhushan Kain. He has been in the educational sector for nearly 4 decades now. He has been associated with schooling both in India and abroad, and he has taught for 12 years, and he has been associated with schooling for over 25 years, most keenly associated with the Delhi Public School Society. He helped in nurturing the Bal Bharati Public School in Bhopal, and he was the founder, director, cum principal at the Credence High School in Dubai. We welcome you, sir. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Rajasekhar Vundru, an IS of the 1990 batch Haryana cadre. He's one of the most important scholars on caste and Dr. Ambedkar in India today. He's an alumnus of Hyderabad Central University, JNU. He has played a critical role in bringing caste and Dr. Ambedkar in the public discourse, especially through print. His book titled Ambedkar, Gandhi and Patel, The Making of India's Electoral System, published by Bloomsbury, is one of the most important works on the Indian electoral system in the last 75 years. Thank you very much, sir. Next, we would like to invite Ira Pande ma'am. Ira Pande ma'am started her career as a university lecturer and taught for about 16 years in Punjab University in Chandigarh, after which she shifted to Delhi and has been writing and editing in various capacities ever since. She has edited the prestigious magazine Seminar and has authored tens of books. She was here in the session before this. We welcome you again, ma'am. If you could please come on stage. Next up is Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. a retired IAS officer of the 1985 batch. He is the primary patron and honorary consultant to the Literature Festival Value of Words. So he's the reason why we're all gathered here. A big round of applause for Dr. Sanjeev Chopra. Right. Lastly, I'd like to invite the chair for this session, Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who is the Chancellor of Ashoka University. He's a renowned historian who has received his DPhil in modern history from University of Oxford. He has written many seminal texts on modern Indian history in the last 2 or 3 decades. He's also edited some spectacular anthologies on modern Indian history. The one that stands out for me is the one that talks about Indian history in the Indian Ocean context. The total time for this event is 1 hour and 5 minutes. We'll hope to finish the session, the discussions on stage in 55 minutes so that the floor can be opened for the audience in the last 10 minutes. Over to you, sir.
You can just announce who is doing what.
Right. So, right. Sorry, sir. Yeah.
We should
So,
know who has read what.
right. Thank you. What we've done is we've divided different authors and texts and given them to different dignitaries here who will be talking on them. Pradeep Singh sir will be talking on Mahatma Gandhi. Kulbhushan Kain sir will be talking on Savarkar and Bhagat Singh. Pande ma'am will be talking about Annie Besant. Rajasekhar Vundru sir will be talking about Dr. Ambedkar, and Dr. Chopra will be talking about Aurobindo and Jinnah. So over to you, Rudrangshu sir.
There cannot be any logical order. Being an old-fashioned fuddy-duddy, I will say ladies come first. So Ira Pande with Annie Besant. Okay, you want to do chronological?
That's how it
Yes. So then we have to start with.
Start with 1909, Hind Swaraj.
Aurobindo earlier. Okay, so. No, Savarkar is 1907.
Then in that case, I stand corrected. We could start with Savarkar.
We'll start with Savarkar and then go to Gandhi. Well, actually, we're breaking the chronology. Aurobindo should come first, 1890s, but nonetheless.
Bengali.
Uttar Pada address is also 1909. So, okay, so we have. So 1907, 1909, and then Annie Besant, and then Ambedkar. Okay. So, yes, Gandhi.
Very good afternoon. I'm sure this session has kind of disrupted. It is supposed to be a disruptive session, but I think it started with disrupting your lunch. So apologies for that. But anyway, that's on a lighter note. Ira and Rudrangshu would probably agree with me that once a good book is written, the world is never the same. And here we are going to be talking about certain seminal texts. And to know that these seminal texts have, come out of India at a time where India was itself shaping its destiny, I would congratulate Mr. Chopra for, curating this session and bringing forth these great iconic books. Rather, they are source books for ideas. And today that we are getting an opportunity to discuss it with a larger audience, so in a way we are lucky, and I hope that you would find it interesting what little is being shared. These books, of course, require a lot of introspection, rereading. So therefore, in a short session like this, I'll try to do justice to this particular topic. The person who wrote Hind Swaraj, or rather who is now credited with having written, he didn't actually seriously write this book. It was Mahatma Gandhi at a very critical point in his life. I mean, he was kind of midlife. He was around 1909, would place him, he was around 40. He had half his life which had gone by, and another equal half was waiting for him. So he was on a kind of a knife edge, both politically, personally, and biologically possibly also. So now we see Gandhi as a very, very Indian kind of a persona. But his formative ideas were perhaps which came more from West than from India. At least at this point of time when we are talking of Hind Swaraj. Now Hind Swaraj the genesis of Hind Swaraj, it is important to understand. Because if you know the context of a particular book or an idea, then we kind of internalize that idea far better. Now, Mahatma Gandhi in 1909, you see, he was taking, let's make it a little simple and a little easier. He was making a train journey. And this train journey was, he was in South Africa, by the way. And at the platform, when he was about to board the train, a dear friend of his, Henry Pollack, he came and kind of handed a book to Gandhiji that you read this book. And Gandhi had no idea what that book was all about. So once he sat down, he took out that book and saw it, and it happened to be John Ruskin's Unto This Last. Now, Ruskin was not really a contemporary of Gandhi, but they happened to be living at the same time. Ruskin's, he was almost, not exactly contemporary, but anyway, his ideas, Gandhi started reading that book during the train journey. And it was a 24-hour train journey, and he says that I couldn't sleep after reading this book. And the very next day he says, I wanted to put in practice what I read from this book, the seminal ideas, and I wanted to put it in practice from day one. So now, I will just take some key points because the book is in fact a very slim volume, and it was originally, of course I'm talking now of Hind Swaraj, not Unto This Last. Unto This Last he has read and he was deeply affected by it. Just as much he was deeply affected before writing Hind Swaraj, he was in touch with Leo Tolstoy. Now, this is a very unique thing that Leo Tolstoy, in the last months of his life, 1909-10, he was almost, on his last days rather. And Gandhi happened to write to him that, I have seen your ideas, I have read about you, I have heard about your concept of non-violence and, concept of labor as a kind of a thing that a person should adopt, personal labor, earning your living through manual work. So these two ideas about Tolstoy had impressed him. And one of the last letters that Leo Tolstoy wrote ever, it is available in his collected letters, that he wrote to Mahatma Gandhi. And he told him that, look, I'm quite impressed by what you have written. And then he also sent him a book which Tolstoy had, commented upon, called A Letter to a Hindu. So he sent all this literature back to Gandhi, and Gandhi also read them deeply. And this was also one of the formative texts which helped Gandhi to formulate his ideas about Hind Swaraj. Another influence on Gandhi at the time was Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he was an American, but again, it's surprising that, in an age like today, we are used to internet and to mobiles and all kind of communication which are at the speed of light. Despite, continental differences, Gandhi was able to understand what Ralph Waldo Emerson was writing on civil disobedience. So one of the seminal ideas, which came from Ruskin, then another idea about non-violence and how to, do voluntary labor for yourself from Tolstoy. Another idea came before writing of Hind Swaraj, came from Emerson regarding civil disobedience, where Emerson wrote that if you're not in conformity with any law which is repugnant to you, which does not appeal to any sense of morality or ethics, you don't obey it. So this is another thing which an idea which came to Gandhi not because of his Indian experience, but experiences which were coming from across, from Russia, from USA, and from England, and so on. Now, when Gandhi wanted to put these ideas, he said, how do I put it? So as was being discussed in the earlier session by Rudrangshu about how Gandhi used the dialogic method to write this book. In fact, it was not written as a book, it was written as a question and answer form to a reader. He made up an imaginary reader. The reader would, reader of his Indian opinion, that was a newspaper. So that was in South Africa. So he would have a question written to him, and then he would make a reply to it. And this was happening in Gujarati. And there he put forth these ideas of, how to relook at civilization, how to relook at ethics, how to relook at personal interaction between, people. And how do you look at various aspects which can ennoble a person? So these kind of discussions were going on between the reader and writer, and it's a slim volume. I mean, this is a centenary edition because 1920 it came about, so we are still in the centennial year. So this question and answer, it went on for several months. Then in the end, by the time this became quite popular, the British government wanted to ban this particular book. Rather ban this, he had collected all these question and answer and brought it forward in the form of a book called Hind Swaraj or Indian Home Rule. So now the issue was that the Gujarati edition was to be banned. So Mahatma Gandhi, at the prompting of one of his European friends, he dictated it overnight. He dictated it, and the person took it down, verbatim, and he wrote it down. And the English version is the one which was translated in 1910, and then again in 1920. So this is the text which Gandhi has. In fact, it's one of the books which he has in a way written, because the English translation was done by his own hand. Otherwise, most of Gandhi's collected works are in forms of his correspondences and his discussion interviews. So his collected works, which Ira ma'am would be able to tell you, because publication division did some human work. I mean, they brought out 90. I remember, ma'am, I was in JNU at one time, and
100 plus volumes.
Yes. So I was able to buy 80 volumes that time. 76, in 1976 when I was there. So I think 80 volumes had come out, and I got it for a song. It was hardly for a few hundred rupees, and people were surprised in the university. A van coming from publication division and sending, and of all books, Mahatma Gandhi's books, were coming into the hostel. So Gandhi's output is tremendous. But what he himself wrote and brought out as a book is Hind Swaraj. So a lot of ideas are there, and now I'll just take out a few points, because otherwise it is difficult to exactly tell. This is not the Communist Manifesto or Mao's Red Book, because I said something about JNU. By the way, I bought the Communist Manifesto for 2 rupees 20 paisa from bookshop in JNU, which also happened to. It just looks like this only. Just a few key points. I think I just need to kind of tease your memory, so that in case you are interested in this book, you would be. See, one of the key points of Hind Swaraj is that it gives you certain ideas for an alternate civilization. Now you would wonder, see, what Gandhi has written in the 1910 text, some of these are questionable. In the sense, some of them you may not agree with. But similarly, ideas about liberalism, capitalism, and Marxism have also not really given you what, they were very powerful ideas. So now there is a lot of intellectual interest going back into Gandhi to see how his ideas can be modified and adapted, especially in terms of how do you look at concentration of wealth. It's one of the ills he pointed out a century ago, and we are exactly facing it right now. When concentration of wealth in the hand of a few capitalists, or concentration of technology, which kind of, it is supposed to create jobs, but in fact, there are many people who are jobless. So such ideas, and then his own insistence that that violence is not a way forward in solving any problem, any social problems. And in fact, one of the key ideas which I personally feel in Hind Swaraj is that Gandhi very clearly said, in fact, it was directed at something which was happening in India while he was in South Africa. Partition of Bengal in 1905 had taken place. Now, it was a kind of a very traumatic event for the entire country, and definitely for Bengal. When Bengal was partitioned by Lord Curzon in 1905, there was a tremendous upsurge against, the British rule, the British government, and people on the ground who were, associated with British. That means the people who were in service. And a lot of Bengali young men took to violent means to show their resentment, or rather to show that they were not in agreement, and they thought that this may be the final solution to removing the British rule. So Gandhi's Hind Swaraj was in fact written to tell Indians that this is not a way forward. Why? Because he said, if you're going to be taking to violent means, how many Indians will need to be armed? And where from are you going to arm them? The British had the capability to come out winners in the First World War. Then secondly, later in the Second World War, if they could handle that, it was not going to be possible for a few hundred Indians with arms to kind of find a solution for independence. So one of the points in Hind Swaraj is on this aspect. Then equally important in Hind Swaraj is that Gandhi says that the Swaraj, what he calls Hind Swaraj, is that not only is talking of political Swaraj, he says what is more important is that you have Swaraj for yourself. You make yourself superior than what can be got through other means. You improve your own self. If you're yourself a better person, society becomes better. So these are some of the ideas which Gandhi gave, and now there is an intellectual interest again back in his ideas. And it would be wonderful to see, in fact, what he talks about conservation, environmental degradation, which happened because of industry, rapid industrialization in parts of India. So he saw a way out that if you have decentralized industries or you have at least balanced growth in the country, these are all things which he has written in his Hind Swaraj. So not taking more time because I think there are other things and we have a time limit. But I would certainly request you all that you do have a look at his ideas on environmental issues, in ethical behavior. These are important issues which are still very critical to a development of a nation. So I would say that today in Idea of India, Mahatma Gandhi's Hind Swaraj is something which is very much alive, and we should seriously have a look at it. It will be for our good and for the good of the nation.
Thank you, Pradeep. Just a few interesting trivia on Swaraj. It was written on a ship, Hildonian Castle. Gandhi was traveling from Southampton to South Africa. It was written on the ship's notepaper, and he wrote it in about 9 or 10 days in a flurry. And when his right hand got tired, he wrote with his left hand because he has taught himself to write with his left hand. But the amazing thing is, you look at the original manuscript of Hind Swaraj, at a rough count, it doesn't have more than 15 cancellations or alterations. So in fact, he had it all in his head, so he didn't need to revise it. And the other point that Pradeep touched upon is very important. It's the only book of Gandhi that Gandhi himself translated. Even experiments with the story of my experiments with truth was translated by Madhav Desai, Gandhi's very trusted secretary. So Hind Swaraj stands as the text that Gandhi himself translated. So that shows the importance he gave to that text. So those are just little additions to what Pradeep had to say. And I do think the text is 30,000 words, but I think every responsible citizen of India should read those 30,000 words. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, that's up to you. But it's a very powerful text and a very relevant text as well. May I ask you to be the second speaker? And Savarkar only, is it? It's Savarkar.
Savarkar and maybe after some time.
You focus on
I think so, yeah. Okay. So I'm keeping a little bit tap on my time. Very good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. And to talk on somebody who's at best quite controversial, I think so. But at the same time, I think so very relevant. Controversial because I think so a lot of people don't understand him well enough. I mean, say, because Savarkar is associated with the word Hindutva, because he's associated with the word Hindutva, they feel that the word Hindutva revolves around the word Hinduism. But he made it very clear that he's not a Hindu. I mean, say, let's be very clear about it. He called himself an atheist. And he says Hindutva has got nothing to do with Hinduism. Hinduism is a part of Hindutva, but it is not Hinduism. So this is something we have to understand about Savarkar, and this is something which makes him very, very relevant today. And I think so when we look at Savarkar in greater detail, which probably the discourse at this time will not allow us to do, I think so a lot of India that is being shaped, including even the Uniform Civil Code that comes out. I'll read an extract out of it as to how he feels that if everybody agrees to one vote, so on and so forth, then it's acceptable to him. So that's the second part. The first important thing which I will start with, and I'll try to keep it brief, is about the 1857 revolt, his monumental work which he wrote. Now, Savarkar is a very interesting human being. He's a highly intellectual human being. And he started off as a kind of a revolutionary. I don't know whether the word terrorist is a good word to use. But he started off with the philosophy that the Britishers, they need to be eliminated step by step, and that pressure must be built on them. The fear must be built in them. And he took the view that 1857 was not a revolt, it was a war of independence. And he said that this is ridiculous to talk of 1857 as a revolt of Sipahis. Or you just reduce it to some chapati controversy taking place, or you reduce it to some kind of religious gun cartridges and so on. He says a uprising from Peshawar to Bengal can't revolve around just 2 or 3 flimsy grounds. He says it was a full-fledged war of national independence. And I think so, the relevance of that document is that it created the idea and gave a lot of pride to the Indians and gave the first concept really of India being a nation and that they had actually revolted against the British. Now that's a different issue, that the revolt was suppressed and the revolt went out. But Savarkar had in his mind that another revolt has to take place. And the seeds have to be sown. And for that, I think so, he again thought and took refuge that the armed forces must be told about this. You see, and though the other revolt took place and the many other things took place, and though those attempts also failed, but I think so you can see, now this is the alternative view of history. I'm a great fan of Gandhi in the sense that I thought he had his capabilities to mobilize masses. With a click of his thumb, he could call off the non-cooperation movement or the civil disobedience movement. But I think so, I had this discussion with Pradeep also. I don't think so India could have got independence so easily in case there were no revolts in the naval ratings. Now, how did those revolts take place and who inspired them? And what was the effect of Savarkar on Netaji Bose? Or people like M.N. Roy, or people like Raj Bihari Bose, or Bhagat Singh? You see, that seed got in. And though it didn't succeed in 1914, but that's all right. It was a very serious revolt. And even some succeeded, like the Russian Revolution succeeded. You know, secret ways by which they brought Lenin from Germany. The Germans helped them. Here also they were seeking the help of the Germans. Here they were seeking the help of the Japanese who were against the British. Now the Germans helped the Russians. They brought Lenin, smuggled him to Germany, through Finland, Bolshevik Revolution. In India it failed. Probably somebody leaked out and things like that. So that is one part of Savarkar, which he gave the Indians an identity. And let's be very clear about it. He was not a man who believed in the way we thought Hinduism had evolved. In fact, he was the first one to raise his voice against untouchability, even before Baba Sahib Ambedkar. This is something probably we don't know about. And he built a temple for all. It's called Patit Pavan Mandir in Ratnagiri, where he was released. So here was a man who, because maybe again, it's for you people to decide. Maybe not so secular in the sense that he did not think a particular community belonged to India, but every other way, he was very modern in his approach. And that is very reflected in his second reincarnation when he defines what is Hindutva. Now, I want you to all, that this is what is driving Indian debate today also. And I think so all of you must go. And this is the lecture he gave in 1937 in Karnavati, which is Ahmedabad. And this is a very, very interesting, you must read this, all of you must read this thing, and which I'm thinking. But I'm just going to take 1 or 2 extracts out of this and just make you feel that here is a man who is highly misunderstood and a man who actually is a very important thought process that is driving India, has driven India. And maybe it might find fruition later on in the thing. So first he says, who is a Hindu? And that is something we need to be very, very clear on what Savarkar said. It's not me. I'm saying it's Savarkar. What does he say? He says, who is a Hindu? He says a Hindu is someone who considers India to be his motherland. Now, see, don't think of Hindutva as Hindu. He says Hindu is one who considers India to be his motherland, Matrubhumi, the land of his ancestors, Pitrabhumi, and the holy land, Punya Bhumi. Right? India is the land of the Hindus since their ethnicity is Indian and since the Hindu faith originated in India. Wait. Other faiths that were born in India like Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism also qualified. In Savarkar's terms, as variants of Hinduism, since they fulfill the same three criteria. But he adds, not Islam or Christianity. Now that's what the modern debate is all about. Now he says Hindu is a geographical term. Even Nehru used it. It comes from the word Sindhu. And it is from the river Indus, stretching from the Indus to the seas. So Hindu is a geopolitical term. It is not a religious term. And religions and culture, the same history, the same challenges that were faced between this land, he says that is Hindu. That's what he calls the Hindu Rashtra. It has nothing to do with the way we practice Hinduism. He says that is the land where all religions originated before other religions came in. And he says that is why it is not proper to use the word Hinduism, because the moment you use Hinduism, then we are dividing it. Hinduism, Sikhism. He says we'll call them Vedics, people who believe in the Vedas. And we'll call them, if you want to differentiate between a Sikh and a non-Sikh, you'll say, ये वैदिक सिख है, ये वैदिक जैन है, वो वैदिक हिंदू है. Whatever it means. So it's a God. And he says, I have no problems. So I think so here is a man who actually defines Hinduism in the way we need to define it. Maybe a little bit, we need to work that out. But imagine a country which is a geographical entity and from which many religions originated, and whose religious places are in those religions. And then you probably might also understand why this talk of Akhand Bharat is all about. You know, some of our most important temples are in what is now Pakistan. And some of the biggest Buddhist sites are in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. So, which other religion you have your most religious sites in another country? Now look at Savarkar in that particular context. So I think so here was a man who actually, and he says, if you call me parochial, he says, what is parochial? Tell me which country is not parochial. Doesn't Britain have 3 different segments in it? There are Welsh, there are Irish. He says, anywhere where the majority have something in common, which is greater than something which they differ in, he says that will be called a nation. Tell me what is wrong in that, actually? I mean, what is it? So I think so here is a man who's leading the discourse by defining the word Hindu, differentiating from the word Hinduism, using a simpler word called Hindutva, defining it and saying that these are the various angles which are to it. Of course, that's the other part of it, but then I will come back to it in case we have enough time as to how we to resolve that. And he writes that towards the end. And let me tell you, Jawaharlal Nehru in his book, The Discovery of India, also defines Hindu as the land between the Indus and the seas. Of course, Nehru goes on to say that in India, people who came in, they kept getting absorbed. So there are layers upon layers in India. Savarkar, on the other hand, says, well, the originals were the originals. Later on, the people who came. So, never mind, thank you. So, but this is what is, I think so, the idea of India. This is also an important idea of India. You see? And the other idea of India also, in case we have to work it out, we have to work things out. And that is what is driving India today. And I think so there's this is something which is very important. And he remains controversial because of one or two reasons. But on the other side, he definitely gave the Indians a feeling that Hindu Rashtra between the river Indus and the seas is a very important component of what actually ethnic Indians are all about. So I will come back to that later on, Bhagat Singh later on if you have the time, but I think so it's time to pass on to Sanjeev.
Sanjeev, your turn.
Thank you. Let me also just give you the context of how this thought of ideas of India came about. I got this fellowship at the Harvard School of South Asia, and the director there, he said, let's do a seminar, let's do something which we can engage the undergraduate students there. So this is how I came out with some of these things. And Aurobindo, the person who was supposed to discuss this is Makarand Paranjpe. He's actually the person who's done a lot of work on Shri Aurobindo. Very briefly also, because we're running out of time, and as the curator, I must be the one who should give up my time. The text of Aurobindo is important because he defined India and India's freedom not in political but in spiritual terms. I think that was a very important aspect, because everybody else, from Jinnah to Ambedkar to Gandhi to everybody else, was looking at taking power or looking at India in terms of power. But for Aurobindo, especially, he talks about his year in jail. He talks about how he moved from one hajat to another hajat, and then he actually comes out that he actually got revelations. He actually began to understand what the Sanatan Dharma is, and he felt that India has to redefine herself, not in terms of political power, not in terms of military power, not even in terms of economic power, but he felt that the Uttarapara address specifically, and after that he renounced politics in a way, moved on to Aurobindo Ashram. So that was a very important marker, a very important time when he looked at India in terms of Sanatan Dharma and in terms of how could he take it forward. So I'll just stop here because I think we have other panelists, and it's a small text. And what we are going to do in the Valley of Words is that we're going to be publishing all these texts as soon as we get the copyright things. Most of them are sorted out because they're above 40 years, and then we'll be asking scholars on this, on each of these texts to give their commentary, and then we can, this is a discussion that can continue forever and ever and ever. So let me stop here because as the curator, I must speak the least. Thank you.
Only point, Sanjeev, I want to make, because you come after the discussion on Savarkar, is that this strand or this idea that British rule must be overthrown through violence, which Savarkar advocates right from the book, from the history of the War of Independence, 1907. It actually predates Savarkar. And one of the originators of this idea is actually Aurobindo.
Yes, but he gives it up.
He gives it up.
So
but I think Aurobindo cannot just be seen as a monolithic spiritual figure. There are layers to Aurobindo, from being an extremely westernized gentleman who studied at St. Paul's, was a brilliant student, and in utter penury. His father left his 3 sons in England without a penny. And Aurobindo, because he was a scholarship student, he managed to pay their landlady, and sometimes they had to pawn their shoes. They were so poor. This is a mystery in the life of Aurobindo, why his father left the 3 kids. And Aurobindo, because of his sheer brilliance, at St. Paul's, where he was a scholarship student, and then again at King's in Cambridge, where he was again the top student. It's interesting. In the Alipur bomb case, the judge who sentences Aurobindo was 11th in the ranking. Aurobindo was first in the same year. Okay? So I think we need to not enough has been done, work has been done on Aurobindo. I wouldn't like to pigeonhole him, I'm sorry
No,
to
sir, no,
disagree,
I-
as just a spiritual leader.
No,
Indeed, yes, he was a spiritual leader and he had a profound understanding and learning of the Vedas as well as of the Upanishads. But there is this other side of Aurobindo as well where we can link him up with Savarkar, with Bose, with Bhagat Singh, that entire strand of non-Gandhian nationalism, if I may call it like that, where it is not only it is non-Gandhian because it is not non-violent. Let me
Yes.
put it like that.
No, but let me confess, you see, that this was to be done by Makarand.
Okay,
And,
yeah.
and he couldn't make it, so I was just a very poor substitute for having, just explained
No,
what
but I'm
what
glad
just
you are going to reprint the Uttarpada address because it is a very important.
It's a very important address. I mean, I could just tell you what I read in that text because the
There are
expert couldn't
many
come to it.
interesting ideas in Aurobindo. Some of them are problematic, like he believed that the siege of Stalingrad was lifted because of his sadhana.
Yeah, because of his meditation.
Sadhana, because of his meditation. Right? So, how does one buy that? How does one read that? Who knows? I mean, So, anyway, Ira, Annie Besant. There's a continuity here because Besant also has a strand of mysticism, theosophy.
Let me begin by sort of altering the framework of this discussion so far. One, I'd be interested to know whether you assigned me Annie Besant because I'm a woman. And two, because Annie Besant represents, to me, in all these texts, not only is she the only woman who's quoted or given to us to read, but there is a curious absence of women and the female perspective and the agency of women. Surely the idea of India can't exclude half its population. And I'm aghast that most people they have this kind of toxic masculinity, and unfortunately that has carried on into every party and into every institution that has been influenced by these people. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The second is, before I come to Annie Besant and what she has written on India and home rule and that aspect, which several other people have written about, and I don't think I need to say the most banal, trivial things that she has talked about. The other is language. If you look at many of these texts which have come to us, the one person who impresses me always is Gandhi. There is such simplicity and such clarity in what he writes. He is not a style. In most cases, you feel there's more icing than cake. And there is a unconscious, subconscious, or maybe deliberate attempt at trying to overpower the listener with what the writer or the speaker is saying. The rhetoric of it. I'll give you a small example. I was once talking to Kulbhushan Singh, who, as you know, is a very irreverent man, but a very perceptive person. And we were talking about style, and he was talking to me about something I was writing. And he said, the most difficult to write is the simplest prose. And he himself was a master prose writer in the little world that he occupied. And he says, all of us were so impressed by Nehru's, I remember his last will and testament, that famous long years ago, we made a tryst with history. Sab bachon ko rata hua tha. We were all made to learn it by heart. Even now, I think after 70, 60 years, I can recite it. But he said, do you realize when Nehru says, at the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will arise to... He said, the world doesn't sleep, we sleep. At the stroke of the midnight hour, the world is wide awake. But we were so mesmerized by the sheer poetry and the rhetoric of Nehru's writing that it took me, I mean, I was in my early 60s, I think, when Khushwant pointed this out to me. And I realized that itne saal maine kabhi socha hi nahi iske bare mein. I mean, was I blind, deaf, stupid, what? And he says, if you look at Gandhi, you know what he says or what he writes in Hind Swaraj or in any of his experiments with truth, it goes to the heart because it comes, the vocabulary comes not from his brain but from his heart. And that is why I feel that most of these texts, admirable though they are and influential though they were in the construction of a country that needed to be built from the embers of a civilization that had vanished, of a faith that was receding, and it was made by people who were educated abroad, including Gandhi. It was also curiously empty of women. There was a deep sense of shame. There was no sense of pride in our own history and our past. All that comes across, and to some extent, all of us are guilty, even now. We get so easily impressed by somebody who speaks good Hindi or good Bangla or good English. But there are so many who can't speak very well, and yet their minds are brilliant minds. There are sometimes I'm amazed at how much wisdom my workers or my Mali or, those who are connected with the earth, with lives which we have never seen. It's all right for me to say jhoot mat bolo to somebody who's working for me. Agar jhoot bol ke uska pet pal raha hai, to who am I to tell her jhoot mat bolo? It is, sometimes I feel a privilege to be where we are. And this is what I constantly, when I was going through all the texts that you sent me, Sanjeev, they were very remarkable. Some I'd read, some I read for the first time. I realized that, this kind of self-righteousness and this sense of moral superiority, which peeps from every one of them, even Gandhi, is something which, there is a sense of ego, which, no matter how deeply you may deny that Gandhiji was the greatest Mahatma, he gave up everything, but look at the price he paid. When he became Bapu, the father of the nation, his own family broke up completely. In fact, for years I have wanted to write a biography of Kasturba, because I have seen a picture of her and she looks exactly like my Nani, who was also widowed very young, left with 8 or 9 children to look after. And the struggles that she went through to put them all through a decent college and university. Everyone remembers my grandfather, who's a very flamboyant, handsome man. But nobody saw the sacrifices that my Nani made. Similarly, in my own house, my mother always kept she was the more brilliant parent. My father was a great man too, but my mother was a person in her own right. But she was always very conscious of the fact that she must never overpower the man. And this is what I have against all these texts, that they do not provide the kind of space that women and the softness of this culture deserves. आप हमारी mythology में भी देख लीजिए. It is replete with images and things where the sister has stepped back. Look at the Congress party just now. Priyanka Gandhi is by far the more deserving person to head that party. But वो है, कुछ लड़के का मोह इतना होता है that you can't stop. So it's गलत बात है ये. तो मैं यही सबसे कहना चाहती हूँ. अच्छा, now to come to Annie Besant, who, poor thing, has only 2 minutes of my time.
It's fine, but the text is quite long.
Huge, मैं मारने वाली हूँ तुमको.
It's the longest.
The longest one, yeah. So I'm going to skip over some of the bits that I know. जो उनका home rule वाला है, that bit, because that's the bit that really impacts this discussion. Annie Besant, along with the mother of the Aurobindo Ashram, along with C.F. Andrews, along with so many British or foreign people who came to India and who were doing some kind of prashchit. There was a sense of a deep social guilt that they had come into a country, taken it over. I mean, we've got so many examples now of how India was really destroyed, its economy was destroyed, its self-confidence, its sense of ownership over its own history. All that is now freely written about. Lekin us zamane mein nobody had the courage to say what she was saying. And she says that, we must allow the whole thing of a home rule, which is as close as you can come to Swaraj or I mean, exactly, that let the people decide how they should be ruled and who should rule them. Who are we sitting in some island many thousands of miles away? And unfortunately, I think that, even though, and also because she was a theosophist and believed very strongly in a kind of spiritual greatness of a civilization which she admired deeply, like many of the other foreigners who I've mentioned. Annie Besant had a very strong voice because she was the one who advised the Congress party to set up a political party and to not look at somebody to give you your freedom. You will have to get your freedom. So her work, I think, is of great importance, and her voice, as I said, that of a woman, and not just a woman in the sense of a token woman like I am here.
Oh, please, come on, come on. You're a VoW body. Come on.
No, I'm joking. But unfortunately, women are never given, the kind of importance that they really deserve. You're trying, believe me, I've worked long enough in this world to know that you have to run twice as hard in order to be half as successful. You have to take nonsense from some male chauvinist pig who's your, and who is a stupid man who is threatened by you, but you take it. Ask any woman who's worked here. And so, until even Gandhi ji, until Sarojini Naidu and people like her joined, was a very male and very toxic masculinity, and that you wore a loincloth. Now, which woman would wear only a loincloth and walk with Gandhi? How far can you sacrifice your clothing and modesty? So there are limits to how much you can do. However, I do think that all the texts that were mentioned here are important. My job was to merely focus on what I feel is sometimes overlooked, on the agency of women and of the importance of a woman's perspective.
I must mention that in the Pan-India debate which was organized by Mantrana, all the 4 finalists were women, were girls. And so it was, so the first, second, so it's changing, but it may not be changing as fast as
So, Annie Besant and agency, very important point, Ira. At 1917, 1918, young Saraswat Brahmin girl, just widowed, had returned to her mother's house, maternal uncle's house, where her mother lived because she had been rejected by her stepson. And so that house was a kind of a hub for intellectual ideas and discussion. One of the was Annie Besant. And this young girl used to eavesdrop on these ideas, these discussions taking place in the drawing room, and heard Annie Besant. The young girl's name, very famous now, is Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. And agency, 1930, the Dandi March has been announced. Gandhi has cherry-picked the group that is going to walk with him to the coast. When Kamala Devi appears and tells him that Gandhi had said no women to come would be part of that march. Kamala Devi comes to him and says, I'm coming on the march with you. So Gandhi says, well, I have said no women are to come. So Kamala Devi told Gandhi, I haven't come here to ask your permission. I haven't come here to ask your permission. I've come here to tell you, as an act of courtesy, that I will be in the march. Can you stop me?
And then when he was arrested, she's the one.
And then, of course, she became part of the march. Gandhi withdrew that order. And she actually said, what do you do with a woman like Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay? So agency that Annie Besant and women like her, Meera Behen, Margaret Noble, known as Sister Nivedita, Kamala Devi herself, that the women agency and the mother, the women agency, which is so neglected in the study of modern Indian history. I think there's a continuity there between Annie Besant and what Kamala Devi overheard Annie Besant say. Sorry for that addition. Ambedkar, a different kind of emphasis on agency, I think.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, when we come to the value of words, being a fellow IAS officer, it's our literary alma mater. Thank you so much for inviting. And Dr. Sanjeev Chopra has made a decision at the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy. These poor civil servants, they hardly write. If at all they write, any work by them should be in the library of the academy. There was a great decision taken by him. We are all there. Whosoever writes are all there. Thank you so much, sir. Many ideas of India. Texts. So I'm holding one of the texts. Annihilation of Caste. Diamond Jubilee Edition by the Maharashtra government, 1936 to 2012. 5 minutes. In fact, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar made it easier. In fact, he himself, in his second edition, said, this is all what I wrote. In 4 lines, he said, this is what all I wrote in the Annihilation of Caste. Firstly, sir, being an alma mater, value of words, I remember my 56 foundation course, my friends Atul Tiwari and Kumar Naik, who specially said that I should mention this. Firstly, on the text, Annihilation of Caste, there is a major context to this. Why the thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar came in? A small twist in this entire story was from 1919, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was pursuing the political rights for the untouchables. 1928, Simon Commission, it rejects. Round table conferences, 1931 onwards. And there he encounters Gandhi in London, and there was a big fight on what is the issue. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says, we are a minority, untouchables are a minority. We are not a part of Hinduism, or we are not Hindus. Later on, in the way it shaped, when Mahatma Gandhi initially opposes the political rights for untouchables, he says they are not ready. Later on, when communal award is announced on August 1932, and he goes on his fast unto death in Yarwada jail in 1932, September, he comes to agree to the political rights for the untouchables. They call them depressed classes. Now here is a major turn on the position of Mahatma Gandhi. He says untouchables or depressed classes are a part of Hinduism. He takes that major step. There was a conversation between Sardar Patel in the same jail, which Mahadev Desai religiously wrote it down. He says, they're a part of Hindus, so I will give them a part of the general seats as reserved seats, and they can contest the so-called quote-unquote Hindu seats because they were separate Muslim seats, Sikh seats, the general seats were Hindu seats. So here comes a major change of acceptance of untouchables as a part of Hinduism, as Hindus. Now what happens next? Mahatma Gandhi renames his magazine, Harijan. He pushes the entire Congress party and all his followers, opening of temples for untouchables. So here is a long thread of he trying to bring in the untouchables into the fold. Now what is happening with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? Dr. Ambedkar, we fast forward from 1932 to 1935. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar says in the month of October on 14th in Yola in Nasik district, he says, I was born a Hindu, it was not in my hands, I will not die a Hindu. Here comes a major break. Now when does this book come in? 1936. So in 35, at the end of the year, a very progressive association called Jat Paat Todak Mandal of Lahore invites him for a speech, and here comes with this entire idea shaping in his mind that, okay, here is a reformist organization, this is my speech. He publishes his speech, 1,000 copies, he sends them, they finally withdraw their invite. Then he publishes in his own personal press called Bharat Bhushan Press. Now what does Baba Sahib say in this? Since I'm getting messages of time up. In a reply to Mahatma Gandhi, he publishes this speech again in 37. He summarizes his entire speech. He says, my speech I may be catalogued as follows. That the caste has ruined the Hindus. That the reorganization of Hindu society on the basis of Chaturvarna is impossible. So the legal sanction should transgress the Varna. Reorganization of Hindu society on the basis of Chaturvarna is harmful. Hindu society must be reorganized. If it has to be reorganized on religious basis, it should be having the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. And in order to achieve this objective, caste and Varna must be destroyed. The sanctity of caste and Varna can be destroyed only by discarding the divine authority of Shastras. This is very briefly Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself says. Now this entire text is the first step of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar of many things he wrote later. He very importantly discards the racial theory of purity of Brahmins. He writes later in Who Are Untouchables and Shudras in 1946 and 48 that the entire Indian society anthropologically and racially is the same. The untouchables were men who were thrown out of the society. Then he goes ahead and brings in that liberty, equality, the concept into a major work in his later on writings. He dissects the ugly underbelly of the caste society and gets into a major writing, Riddles of Rama, and later on the unpublished writing which came in. He goes on. And in this particular speech, there are gems. He says, all these Vedas and Shastras should be blasted with a dynamite. You know, it is not a division of labor, it's division of laborers. Beautiful gems that come into this speech. It's a very short speech, 60, 70 pages. And of late, sir, this has been really come out. It's become the part of curriculum. There's an annotated version. Arundhati Roy gets into this. And so on. So this has become an important text. But what has happened with this text? He throws open the debate and makes Mahatma Gandhi join the debate. It is also very relevant and important that Mahatma Gandhi entered the debate. And it continues. Ever since 1936, this debate of caste continues even today. That is the historicity, context of this most important text. And as the caste debate continues today in politics, we talk about Chaturvarna, whether there should be socio-economic caste census, whether there should be OBC census, whether it should be economically weak. This entire thing transferred. This is the core work that went on. Everybody who wrote on caste goes on about talking about caste. Here it emanates. How do you dissect and look at caste? How do you look at the society? Are you looking at Manusmriti? Are you looking at Shastras, Vedas? How they talk to you about, how do you destroy? He even in this, he talks about women, madam. He says, Mohammedans are cruel to women and Hindus are mean to women. And he says, meanness is worse than cruelty. You know, these kind of things. So, sir, being a shortage of time, I request all of you to request this text again and again, because every time you read it, you get gems out of it. And this is a continuity of all his writings to come out over the years. But he said one beautiful thing, which our nation disagreed with Baba Sahib Ambedkar. In the very beginning of this text, I went up after this, he says, howso learned an untouchable be or antyaja be, the country or the society never accepts him to be a learned man. But on this, our nation disagreed and we made him the father of the Indian Constitution. He was the drafting committee chairman. To that extent, the way we undo what are the issues he raised, how to reform. This is a reformist text. He said intermarriage among castes is one thing that can destroy caste, annihilation of caste. He goes on, he gives several ideas. He says completely rewrite a new book for Hindus. Let their priests be appointed by the government. Let there be a test. You know, also on a lot of ideas. So this book starts it all. Thank you so much. And Jai Bhim.
So we have really overrun our time. So presidential discretionary powers as it were. And, but what I want to emphasize, and this is the most important part of this panel discussion, I think, each of these texts that we've spoken about this afternoon throws open the debate, if I can borrow your phrase, sir. The nature of modernity, the nature of Indian identity, the nature of Indian spirituality, the agency of women, the role of caste in Indian society. These are still being debated, and these are dialogues, discussions, which will continue to shape the making of modern India and contemporary India. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for participating in this discussion. I would like to invite Dr. Sanjeev Chopra to give away tokens of appreciation to us.